Welcome to another episode of Expats in Ukraine. My next guest, I had a lot of fun doing some research on him. It is Chris Swampy. He is a volunteer EOD expert here in Ukraine. He has a huge following on Instagram. This is how I found him, 21.6K, man. But yeah, so before I get into the million-dollar question, which is, why are you in Ukraine? I want to start with maybe like a little icebreaker. So it's like a this or that. I'll say two options and you just pick one, okay?
Okay.
So tea or coffee?
Tea.
Tea, it's UK. Definitely from the UK. Scones or pampushki?
Ooh, pambushki.
Pampushki, yeah? Okay. Steering wheel on the left or on the right?
On the right.
On the right, okay. Yeah, the last guy from the UK, he said left.
Yeah. It doesn't matter anymore.
Okay, and like last question, Isle of Man or Kyiv?
Isle of Man.
Isle of Man, okay,
Man.
yeah. You love your home. Okay, so now the million-dollar question, what brought you to Ukraine? Because you're from Isle of Man.
Yeah.
I know nothing about Isle of Man, by the way.
Okay. It's a long story, so I'll compress it really quickly.
Take your time. Details are kind of really good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to kind of like really cut it short, I joined the British Army in 2000 with the plan of doing a 22-year career. I bust my knee within 6 months, and I ended up out. Went back home, fell back into normal life. And around 2006, 2007, I really wanted to do something useful and to maybe not pursue that same career, but do something that was useful, which ultimately led me to volunteering in Myanmar. And I started volunteering on the ground there, working alongside different militaries that were on there and civilian organizations. I started to learn about landmines there, and then got involved with a couple of clearance projects. And then fast forward to the November, December 2013, and obviously the Maidan protests had started off at that point. And I was just paying attention to it because it was all over the media. I knew nothing about Ukraine. I knew nothing about
So in
Kyiv.
2014, where were you watching this? In the UK or were you in Myanmar still?
I was in the UK when it first came to light, but then from January 2014 to August, I was in Myanmar doing mine clearance. But I'd reached out to some people in Kyiv at the start of January, who I just found on social media, and was just asking questions, trying to get an understanding of what was going on, because not to make a similarity between it, but when the Arab Spring happened, I paid a lot of interest to that as well, and I reached out to a lot of people just to try and understand it from people actually on the ground living there. So I did the same thing when the Maidan protests started off. But then because I was in the jungle for 6 months at the start of 2014, I didn't really have any contact with anyone. I didn't have much internet in the jungle, you know. And when I came out of the jungle in August, properly back into Thailand and then back to the UK, I started going back through messages that I hadn't replied to and was made aware of, obviously, you know, there was the problems in Donetsk, the problems in Luhansk, Crimea had been taken. There was active fighting across the entirety of what was the front line at that point. And I had a number of people asking, could I come out? Could I come out and provide any help? You know, basic medical training, basic firearms training, basic like mine awareness or anything. Yeah. My bags were still packed. So I thought, yeah, I'll come out for 3 months. And
stayed a bit longer than 3 months.
A little bit longer than that, yeah, yeah. So.
Yeah, and I want to talk about, because I read so much about you, man. You have a fascinating kind of backstory. It started off as an arborist.
Yes, yeah.
Arborist to EOD technician, experts. How do you make the leap from one to the other?
I seem to like dangerous jobs. Yeah, I mean, I was a commercial fisherman before that. Prior to joining the army, I was a commercial fisherman.
And Isle of Man, is fishing popular there?
Yeah. So from a commercial point of view, fishing and agriculture were before the banking industry came in, it was the biggest financial markets, really. But yeah, I enjoy things that I really have to focus on. You know, if I'm in a dead-end job, you know, you can't put me behind a desk. This is about the only desk you're going to put me behind. And when I started volunteering out in Myanmar, I was seeing the daily effects of landmine injuries all the time.
Yeah.
Civilians, soldiers, children, with very little support, almost no mine clearance going on at all. And at the time I wasn't going through the best part of my life, and it kind of gave me something to become involved in and give something back. And I realized selfishly it was beneficial for me. It was beneficial to my mental health. Not sure I think the same way anymore, but and it just carried on from that. And once I got involved in it, I really started to enjoy it. And it's something that I can really get my head around. And it's just built up from there and there to the point of taking formal qualifications, obviously coming on, working with the Ukrainian military, working with the Ukrainian police, and just building up my skill set in the background as well. I would say that, outside of Ukraine or Myanmar, I have, you couldn't go and drop me in Syria. You couldn't go and drop me in Iraq and just say, go clear IEDs. These aren't areas that I'm used to, but I think for the ground knowledge that I've built in Ukraine and the ground knowledge I built in Myanmar, I can offer a lot back. So.
Yeah. So sorry if this is like an ignorant American question.
Not at all.
But when it comes to Myanmar, like how mined up is it? And what is the situation like back then when you were working there? Like what side were you working on, or who are you working with? There was a civil war, you told me, but can you tell me more about the backstory on the situation in Myanmar, at least when you were there?
So the areas that I was working in are ethnic group areas. They're not Burmese areas. So I would work in Karen State, and then I've traveled into Karenni State as well.
And Karen, is that north, south, east?
Well, Karenni State is north of Karen State, but you have Karen State, you have Chin State, you have War State, Karenni State. I forget the exact figure, but I believe there's more than 15 different ethnic groups in Myanmar, as well as the Burmese. So the Burmese only make up about 54% of the population, which is why it's having so many problems all the time. I became involved with the Karen National Defense Organization and the Karen National Liberation Army by reaching out to a ex-Australian SASR mercenary from the late 80s. And he just made some contacts for me and got me into country and came in a couple of times and helped me just to really get my feet on the ground properly and be useful. That's always my biggest thing is if I do want to go somewhere and help someone, I'm going to do my research first. I'm not just going to turn up and, oh, hey, I can do this, I can do that, But the areas that we work, they are black sites. You cannot travel into Myanmar and then travel to these areas. At the moment, with the way the fighting is, maybe you can, but what would normally happen would be I would fly into Bangkok. From Bangkok, I would travel to the border, and then I would get snuck across the border into Myanmar from Thailand into Myanmar.
Oh, wow.
To be fair, the Thai military are quite happy for that to happen, as long as it's quietly done, because by going in and either supporting with medical assistance or with teaching, doctors, nurses, dentists, mine clearance, the more support we can give the Karen, well, any of the ethnic groups in their homeland, it stems the flow of refugees coming across the border into Thailand. Because the border is quite porous, and it's not just the problem of refugees coming over. You have migrant workers coming over. You have drug trafficking, you have arms trafficking, you have people trafficking in those areas. So the more help that we could give, the better it worked out for the Thai border guards. So.
And how did your situation wrap up there? Did you complete what you needed to do, or you just saw Ukraine need more help than Myanmar, or?
Because I'm entering Myanmar without a visa, I would have to travel into Thailand on a three entry tourist visa, which meant I would have to leave at the end of that. There's options to get around it, but then I would have to look for a work visa, and then there's everything else that goes on it. So in August 2014, that was when my third entry of my visa wrapped up. So my plan was to actually go back to the Isle of Man, work for a few months, earn enough money to then go out and do another 6 months. But with everything that was going on in Ukraine, because it was a little bit closer, it kind of made sense to come out and just have a look and assess it. As I say, I only planned to come out for 3 months. So,
Yeah. And one last question that is related to kind of Myanmar before we move on to Ukraine, because that's kind of what we're here to talk about. But your call sign Swampy, I heard you earned it in Myanmar.
No, I earned it playing in a band a long time ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about this, or is this some super secret, confidential?
No. The nickname came from my drummer, a guy called Nigel, who was probably about 15, 20 years older than me. So the original Swampy, I'm the original Swampy. The original Swampy was a eco-activist that when one of the motorways or railway lines was being built in the UK, this guy would climb trees, and I was an arborist at the time, and he would chain himself to the top of trees to try and stop them building the motorway. Yeah. And at the time, I might have had slightly long, dreaded hair, and the name just stuck. Yeah. And then when I came to Ukraine and did my documents with Azov, they told me I needed a call sign. I didn't know what to call myself, so Swampy it was, and Swampy it stuck. So.
Yeah, because every time I talk about you with other people, we always say Swampy.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, the Swampy guy, like, yeah, I'm going to have a podcast with Swampy. When I was with the other Chris, I was saying, oh, yeah, you know, Swampy, and you're just Swampy. It's stuck, definitely stuck, man. But what would you say is the biggest difference between, like, what's going on in Myanmar when you were there, the war in Myanmar, like civil war, whatever it is, and what's going on in Ukraine? Like, what would you say are, like, the biggest differences between these two wars?
I mean, this is high intensity, you know. For the limited fighting that I saw in Myanmar, I mean, there was no roads in the places we were working for a start. So you had no vehicles, you had no tanks, there was no helicopters, you know, and on one side you have people wearing flip-flops with AKs. And on the other side, you have people wearing flip-flops with AKs, but have access to fighter jets, helicopters, heavy artillery. So it's a very, very one-sided fight. The only major comparison I can make between Myanmar and Ukraine is I don't think it's an official number, but it was believed that prior to the conflict in Ukraine, Myanmar was most likely the most mined country on the planet.
Oh, wow.
Before Ukraine.
So both sides were mining, right?
Both sides, yeah.
Wow. It's crazy. I never, like, when I think of war, I think, especially nowadays, think of like drones, artillery. You know, they've been talking about mines, because I guess like Russia and Ukraine have been mining up Ukraine, and I feel like I heard recently that Ukraine is like one of the most mined up countries, right?
I would say probably is the most mined country.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, you have your work cut out for you then, man.
Yeah, we all do, yeah.
Yeah, how does it feel? Do you have family back home in Isle of Man or UK still, or?
Yeah, so my...
Because you have a very dangerous profession, man. I can imagine they're worried.
My family is back in the Isle of Man. I think they're more concerned about the airstrikes than what I don't know. I don't ask them, to be honest. And then my partner and my baby are back in the US.
In the US?
They've just traveled back now, so.
Okay, right on. Which states are?
Utah.
Utah,
Ogden.
okay, right on. Yeah. Are you a Mormon?
No, I'm not.
Well, I hope you like Mormons. There's a lot there. Yeah, but yeah, I want to talk about, you know, you, because you got into Azov when you came. Yeah. Can you tell, how did you get into Azov? What made you want to join this battalion?
Sure, so when I was making I'd left Myanmar, I got home, I had 2 weeks before I flew to Kiev. Because you could fly to Kiev then, it was much easier.
Yeah, simpler time, better time.
Yeah, and I was trying to make a decision on what I was going to do, and I reached out to, I tried to reach out to the Ukrainian military. Couldn't find someone that spoke English. Couldn't get someone that spoke English.
That's a big problem in Ukraine in general.
Yeah, tried the National Guard, same issue. Tried the police. I hadn't even heard of the SNS at that point, but I was trying to find agencies that were involved in mine clearance or military units that were involved in mine clearance. And I just couldn't find anyone to speak with properly. So I carried on chatting to a couple of guys from Kiev. I came into country. I sat and spoke with them, and they said, look, there's no legal framework for foreigners to join the Ukrainian armed forces. Fine, that makes sense. But that left me with 3 options. One would be to kind of just run solo as a volunteer and try and make enough connections to be able to be useful in some way. I'm not here to be a war tourist. I'm not interested in driving around just for the sake of driving around. The other two options were right sector or Azov. So I spoke to a couple of people that were on the ground that had knowledge of both. I'd obviously gone onto the internet as well to see what was said about these units. And obviously, you have propaganda from one side, stuff said from another side. So it literally, it almost came down to flipping a coin.
Yeah.
But from speaking to a couple of the guys in senior management at Azov, they've made it very clear that they were actively trying to get amalgamated into either an army unit or a National Guard unit. And I said, okay, well, I'll join on and we'll see what happens. And if you do get amalgamated in the time that you say you will, then I'll stay on, because then I'd be signing paperwork under a military formation, and it wouldn't just be a separate entity.
Yeah.
Which is, I had to kind of be careful of how it would be seen back home as well. So.
And like a lot of people know or hear of Azov, and it's kind of controversial.
Yeah.
Usually, can you explain? Does it deserve to be controversial? Like when people are talking about it on the news, or what are your thoughts on this?
It's Azov's had a lot of bad media. They have had a lot of bad press. I will openly say that, yeah, have they had some bad eggs in the past, which have maybe published photos or tattoos or things that have caused problems? Definitely. There's no point in denying that. But ultimately, nearly everyone that I met were there because they wanted to support and help Ukraine.
Yeah.
Azov recruited very heavily, I think, from like sports supporters, football supporters, and stuff like that. Are you going to get people that are right wing in there? Yeah, of course you are. Is there people that are right wing in the British military? Yes. German military? Yes. French, American, Canadian? Yes. You're always going to get it. But because of the Russian disinformation against Azov, it just built this thing that really caused problems in the media. And I think even now, they still aren't able to access support from the US.
Oh yeah, I was going to talk about that right now, because this disinformation or this kind of Russian propaganda, it had real world effects, because with this $60 billion aid package from the US, I guess one of the caveats of it was none of the money can go to Azov.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel about this?
It's wrong.
Yeah.
It's wrong. You can't turn around and say we support Ukraine, but we're not going to support them. They have proved themselves time and time again in battle. I've worked alongside them in battle. I've worked alongside them on the front line. What they did down in Azovstal was phenomenal. With the limited support and help they were able to get from outside of the city once they were surrounded. They've earned the right to get access to that equipment. They are some of the most motivated, driven people on the front line. And that's not to put any other military unit down in Ukraine, but these boys really want to be able to wear that badge and work with those units.
Yeah. And a lot of people say the one way to get around this is just change the name of Azov to something else and just put these people there. Like, is this a real option?
I don't know. It's way above my pay grade.
Yeah. No, because they need this money. Like it's like a lot of money. It'll definitely benefit Ukraine in general, and it's very unfortunate that this Russian propaganda is so strong that it kind of affects kind of funding towards the Ukrainian military.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think it's because before, like you said, like not before, but like you were saying, like there are kind of like bad apples. They're everywhere. But how has Azov changed since 2014, to now? Because I know they're trying to root out all of this from the Ukrainian army because it makes them look bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how has it changed since like 2014, you think?
Well, from 2014, when they first banded together, I didn't come in till it was, I think, it would have been the first week of September when I came in. They had already had a couple of big battles. Plus, obviously, driving the separatists out of Mariupol in the first place. but it was still quite a, I don't want to say ragtag unit, but it kind of was, because they were having to purchase their own equipment. You know, they were picking up battlefield trophies as weapons.
Yeah.
You know, there was a like a dustbin truck with anti-aircraft guns mounted on the back and just plate steel welded to it and body armor hanging off the windows, and that's what it was. You know, but they used what they had.
Yeah.
You know, and so from the point of me joining on, I saw the evolution, you know, from that point at the start of September, up until they were amalgamated into the National Guard. Once they were amalgamated into the National Guard, they could get more access to vehicles, to weaponry. I think there was 3 or 4 T-64 tanks, if I remember rightly.
Oh, wow.
You know, and they were driving themselves to raise the bar, to raise the standards, you know. A friend of mine who's one of the commanders set up the sergeant school in Kiev, you know, and they've constantly been trying to drive themselves to a higher level. I mean, by the time you got to end of 2015, start of 2016, you know, just the entry exams for guys to get in were not easy.
Yeah.
You know, they were expected to be fit, they were expected to be healthy, they were expected to be driven, you know, and if they had a job to do, they were expected to do that. You know,
Yeah.
there was no space for being lazy and getting around things, you know.
But what was your first day like? Like, say you joined Azov, and then what? You go to the front lines, you do some EOD work, demining some areas. Like, how does this work? I've never met someone such as yourself.
My first day in Azov,
Yeah.
were after signing some paperwork in Kiev, was learning that Saulo is not butter. that was my first day in Azov.
We spent the whole day, huh?
Yeah, that's a whole different story. Yeah, so I joined on. So there was myself and another French guy who were trying to join at the same time.
Yeah.
So normally they would keep guys in Kiev, I think, for a month, and they would just give them very, very basic skills in Kiev. There was a place just off Maidan where they were training guys. But because we were foreigners, I think they just wanted rid of us. Like, you know,
Yeah.
so because of my accent and the fact that I'd just come out of the jungle dealing with Karen and a couple of British and an American for 6 months, even the Ukrainians that could speak English couldn't understand my accent, so they would ask the French guy to translate, which was incredibly insulting. So we were only kept for 2 weeks, and then we were transported down to Uzuf, down the south next to
Where?
Uzuf.
Uzuv.
So it's next to the Azov Sea.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah.
It's between Berdyansk and Mariupol.
Okay.
So, and that was Yanukovych's old seaside resort, actually. So you had the seaside resort, and then I think about 1,000 strong barracks built onto the side of that. So that was perfect for them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, straight away joined on with attached to the 2nd Sotnya, 2nd Infantry Sotnya. There was a group of foreigners. So there was a mix of Swedish, Finnish, French.
What was the typical like backstory on why all these foreign people join, like, you know, Azov, or just join the Ukrainian army in general? Like, what is the typical like reason? I know it varies, but
I think
is there a common
everyone
one?
was there just, you know, for their own reasons, really. You know, people wanted to come and support, people wanted to come and help. I don't think there was anyone that had specifically set out to join Azov. It was just, you know, your options were so limited to Azov or right sector. So, you know, and then at a later date, the Georgian Legion would have been the 3rd option for most people.
Yeah. The war has changed a lot since 2014. I can say, you know, drones are playing like a pivotal, like important role in, you know, what's going on in Ukraine right now. How has it changed for you? Like, what are the other big changes you've seen, you know, since you've been doing all this since 2014?
I mean, just the sheer intensity of the fighting, you know. I've been shot at enough here prior to the full-scale invasion, artillery. Drones were even up to about 2017. I don't remember any munitions ever being being dropped with drones. You know,
Yeah.
it was just Mavics doing surveillance. And then you started to get 2017, 2018, you started to get stuff that was being drone dropped, but it was just in such limited numbers. And we weren't seeing FPVs at that point, you know. Nighttime was when we did most of our missions. In fact, nearly all our missions were nighttime. The only time I was working in the day, really, was to do clearance. If I was clearing minefields, so my tasking, because I was working initially with a reconnaissance unit, I would just do the clearance for the reconnaissance unit. So either they would go out and find something and I would get called out to deal with it, or I would be the one in front searching.
How do you identify a minefield, though? You just say, okay, like, I think they're mined here. This is all mines.
Either someone stood on one in that area, or you're looking for tripwires, or you're looking for ground signs. It really depends on the area. So, marking and mapping, right the way through till at least 2017, 2018, there wasn't a lot of marking and mapping of minefields going on. I know the Ukrainians were marking the bigger anti-tank mine belts, but most of the anti-personnel mines that were being laid by the separatists, you know, there was no marking for this.
So right now they're trying to conscript more people into like the army because there's like, you know, Russia has more people. You know, Ukraine, you know, needs more people. And so I was talking to some people about this, and they were saying they're rushing the training, you know, of people before they send them to like the front line or something like this. So before they were training them like a lot more thorough, right? And now, how can you tell me about the training like going on with new recruits or something like this?
So I can't really say that much, just for the simple reason that I don't see any complete trainings going on. So myself and my partner run an organization. Prior to us starting that organization, since the full-scale invasion, what I've done with a group of volunteers helping me is to go around different units and train them for basic mine awareness, mine clearance, just route clearance skills, so they have something, because it's very different compared to, say, Iraq or Afghanistan, where a foot patrol will be out, they come across something suspect, they put a call in, EOD finishes their ice cream, gets on a helicopter, flies there, does the job, goes back, eats another ice cream. Ukrainians don't have that luxury. But even since day one of the full-scale invasion, we've always found it hard to be able to get access to those soldiers for long enough to be able to give them comprehensive training, because they're having to do that in their spare time, or they're having to be taken away from their unit for, say, a week at a time to get that training. The rest of their training, their tactical training, their shooting training, I honestly couldn't say, because I've never seen a full training rota. When we talk about the numbers, that's a big part of that. You know, I mean, Russia does have the numbers. You know, we see how many deaths they've had. They can soak this up. Ukraine doesn't have those numbers, which means it needs to keep more people on the front line as much as possible. I'm all for the conscription. I really am. I've seen it from both sides as well. You know, I know Ukrainians that have turned around to me and said, I really don't want to be conscripted because I'm not a fighter, I would be no good, I've got an injury. Totally understand that, but let's get you in a support role, you know? Let's take the guy that's driving the truck that would actually be a good fighter and get him where he needs to be. And let's take someone that's not a good fighter and get them in that driving role, or that cooking role, or that admin role, you know. Everyone can fit in and play a part, I think.
Yeah, and say if someone wants to kind of do something similar to you, they want to maybe join a brigade, they're like living in the UK, the US, and they want to help Ukraine in a fighting role.
Yeah.
What advice would you give them?
Think very carefully about what you do want to do. There has been a lot of people that have come out, not all for the right reasons. You know, there is a huge TikTok brigade, you know, but there's been some incredibly solid people that have come out, some really far more experienced than I am. You know, far better combatants. But They really should think about it, because it's not Iraq, it's not Afghanistan. You know, even we've met people that have come out with 10 years experience in the Middle East, and they've come out here maybe not expecting it to be the same, but expecting it to be similar. This is a very, very different war. And now, because of the drone threat, you know, I mean, even when I've been volunteering and not signed on with a Ukrainian military unit, or working with the police, we would go quite close to or to the front line to drop off supplies, to do medical evacs, to support civilian evacuations, literally just to go and assess the needs of units in those areas. Do you have mine clearance equipment? You know, what's the mine risk like in your area? To be able to try and build a bigger picture up and assess the need. But with the FPV drones now, you know, once you start getting within 5 kilometers, it completely changes everything. And the drones don't care. The drone pilots don't care. You can be high speed, low drag as much as you want. You're not outrunning this.
Yeah, no, I've seen so many videos, you know, on the internet. I don't watch the ones with the Ukrainian casualties. I can't, you know, bring myself to watch these, because I walk around Kyiv, I walk around like Odessa, and I see these guys in military. I understand they're putting their lives on the line. I don't want to look at one of these sick videos and say like, oh my gosh, like I saw that guy. I don't know. It's I can watch these Russian ones like all day though, but it's traumatizing, you know. And I want to ask you, you've seen a lot. So like, what is something that impacted you the most when you're like doing your EOD stuff, or when you're just with your battalion in general? Like, what is something that impacted you?
When you're doing the clearance, I don't mind the shelling. I can put up with the shelling. I can put up with the cluster munitions to an extent. I can put up with the cabs. But with the clearance, you get these little, well, they're not even little sometimes, but you get these reminders, because for me, if I'm clearing, my main focus, I still have my peripheral focus, but my main focus is 1 meter by 50 centimeters. This is what I work at, and you know, and this is my world. And I'll completely forget about the human aspect of it. You know, it's just it's a job.
Yeah,
it's all it is. It's a job. Until you start to come across things that are more human, whether that be remnants of clothing, remains, and things like that. So on that side, that's not nice. And just dealing with passed away friends, you know, it's been quite hard.
Well, speaking of, you know, passed away friends, so I was telling you backstage, we have a mutual friend, Chris Ochikon.
Yeah.
And he was saying you guys have a mutual friend.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about this guy? Because, you know, Chris was like, it was like his good friend or something like this. And he connects, I guess he hasn't like met you in person, but he connects with you over this other guy, because I guess it's meaningful to him. Yeah.
Yes. So Chris Allen was a freelance journalist who was out here. He worked on both sides of the conflict. I think he came in 2015. He might have been here in 2014, and I'm not sure. And when he reached out to me, he was actually with the DNR, reporting on their side. And then he'd come back over to report on the Ukrainian side. He just wanted a completely unbiased opinion straight across the board. So we were fighting in Shirokina at the time. And
fighting where? I'm sorry?
Shirokina.
Okay.
So just outside of Mariupol.
Oh, okay.
But I think it's almost, it's almost halfway between Mariupol and the Russian border. It was a sleepy little seaside village. And we did a lot of our work in there in end of 2014, start of 2015. There's some major battles there in early 2015. And when would it have been? I want to say it would have been maybe April time. And he reached out to me and said, you know, where are you? And I said, look, I'm on the front line. I'm in Shirokina. Oh, okay. When are you coming back? I said, I don't know. And the very next day, I'm lay up in a hide inside an old cinema. And someone shouts up the ladder, there's a journalist here for you. Like, what? You know, like there's rounds hitting the building, there's mortars going off in the distance, there's artillery hitting the main Mayak. And yeah, up comes this photojournalist. I And yeah, I mean, straight away, I just thought he was completely insane. But we got on really well, you know.
Yeah.
We became really good friends. And he was splitting his time between Azov, Right Sector, a number of other different military units. And then I think it was 2017. The front line had gone quite static at that point.
Yeah.
I don't want to say stagnant, but it was definitely quite static. And he had gone out to South Sudan to do some filming, and he was killed by a South Sudanese soldier out there. So.
Oh wow. Yeah. Just filming. He wasn't in a combat role.
He was filming, but he was filming alongside a rebel assault onto an area. So we don't know to this day whether they did think he was a combatant or whether they just shot him for being the white guy with them.
Yeah. So. When did you hear about this? Like, were you just in Ukraine and then someone just told you?
Yeah, I got contacted the same day it happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's horrible. Yeah. Well, sorry for your loss, man. Because right when I told Chris that I was gonna invite Swampy for the cast, he was talking about this guy like really highly. Yeah, and he was like looking forward to like meeting you just because this guy was so important to Chris. Because Chris is also like a photojournalist. And he also does work with Pravi Sector, like Right Sector, yeah. So, Chris is a really cool guy. So if you're ever in Kyiv, we can all meet up for a beer and just chat about it. Yeah, but I remember at the beginning of the war, especially like when they were demining deoccupied areas, you know, like for example, Bucha, Irpin, it was sick. They were putting booby traps on like dead bodies.
Yep.
Yeah, they were booby trapping apartment buildings. Have you ever come across something like this?
Yeah. So we were training Ukrainian military units at the time, just as Bucha and Irpin, Hostomel, obviously had been liberated. And we started working alongside the MPU EUD, so the police bomb disposal units. So we did a lot of the clearance at Hostomel alongside the police, and then a number of the hamlets and the surrounding area. We didn't do any of the booby trap clearance of those areas, but some of the mine clearance that was there, and then a lot of the UXO, which it was good work, you know. I mean, we removed a lot of ordnance from civilian areas, but I'll never forget going out with the police on that first day to do a recce around some of these villages and just clear up what we could find, because the police and us were going gate to gate and just asking locals, you know, were the Russians in your house? Have you seen anything in your garden? You know, is there anything on your land? And people would either say yes or no. If they said yes, you would go, assess it, remove it, take it away and destroy it. But word must have got out, because I think day 3, we were driving around another hamlet, and it was almost like people had found stuff in their house or people had found it in their garden. So they'd just removed it to the front gate and put it next to the rubbish bins, you know. So we were the explosive binmen. Yeah. You know, have you got any of this next to your house? Yeah, perfect. You know, we just call around 8 o'clock every morning and pick it up. But there was a number of accidents. There was I think it was a 12 or a 14-year-old boy found like an RPG-22 in his garage, set that off, killed himself.
Oh, can you explain, like, I'm not really the best at identifying which mines are which. What is this RP?
So an RPG-22, it's a RPG round that's within a tube. Oh. So it how to kind of just trying to think of how to describe it to someone that's not used to it, really. It's a green tube with the rocket already inside. So.
So was it like hidden somewhere, or was it?
We don't know.
Oh wow.
We don't know. We just got the call to say it. So, and I know I think the police lost 1 or 2 guys from a body that was booby trapped in the back of a car. Oh. That was early on. I think that was just after Bucha got liberated. So.
That's sick. Like, these people that plant these mines are called sappers, right?
In a normal world, they would be. Yeah. But pretty much anyone that has access to a hand grenade is booby trapping stuff here.
But how would, because they have to kind of put like wires or something like this, or they just put like a grenade and then just put it under some weight, and if you move that weight, it blows up?
I mean, as long as, so once you remove the pin on that grenade, you have the handle to keep closed. So by putting that underneath a body and just removing the pin, the weight of the body is enough to hold it. Yeah. And it's no different to you know, putting it inside a cupboard or anything that can keep the weight
Yeah,
of
weights
that
on it,
spoon
okay.
down. That's all it needs. Or it's tied onto a tripwire.
Okay.
So,
So, I mean, it doesn't have to be like sophisticated. It just has to be like this
no,
grenade.
no.
Okay.
A lot of the stuff, even now, a lot of the stuff that we do find is very, very simple. It's just a sheer amount of it, you know. But now we see a lot of different influences that have snuck in. So 2014 to say 2016, it was very typical Soviet doctrine tactics for mine warfare and booby traps. But what we've seen is there's influences from like Chechnya, there's influences from Syria, there's influences from Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, so it's become an amalgamation of all these different tricks. And Ukraine is it. And now because of the drone warfare as well, and the use of more electronic systems, it's just becoming a new hybrid. So
Yeah. But how badly is Ukraine mined right now? You were talking about earlier, before, it's like one of the most mined countries. I heard it's like about 30 to 40%. Is this going to be a huge problem, like after the war ends?
between landmines and UXO, I think it's approximately 175,000 square kilometers at the moment, which is a lot. You know, if we look at humanitarian demining, so say like Halo Trust, Danish Demining Group, FSD, on an average, a manual deminer, and when I say a manual deminer, I mean a guy with a tripwire feeler, a detector, a trowel.
Well, what's a tripwire feeler? It's just like a
It's
tool?
a thin rod
Okay.
or a thin piece of wire, 14 gauge wire, which is used for searching for tripwires.
Yeah.
If you're in a heavily or even a medium vegetated area, you're looking at maybe clearing 10 meters a day, 10 square meters a day per man.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what are the most dangerous types of mines? I remember like reading about World War II, like bouncing Bettys or something like this. Like, what are the most dangerous types of mines right now? Like,
I mean, they're all equally dangerous. You know, they all have the ability to
oh, the main and
injure
kill,
you.
yeah.
But if we're talking about lethality, the OZM-72, which is a bounding fragmentation mine, is incredibly dangerous. It's normally lethal.
Yeah. Like, what does it do though? Like, how is it different?
It's a canister that is either normally buried or it will be tied to something. Once it's initiated, it can be initiated whether it's mechanically with a tripwire or electronically. It propels the main charge up, which is wrapped in fragmentation. Once it reaches the end of a retaining wire, that retaining wire then pulls out a pin and detonates the mine.
Yeah.
At roughly 0.6 to a meter. So waist height.
Yeah. Wow.
And then just detonate. So
And then like shrapnel everywhere?
Yeah.
Like waist height?
so from the mine body,
Yeah.
omnidirectional, you're talking roughly 25 meters as a lethal radius. So there was an acquaintance got killed in Chasiv Yar less than 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
From one.
From one of these mines?
Yeah.
Wow, man. Do you ever feel scared doing this job? I would be so nervous trying to demine something or just walk through an area not knowing if I hit it like a tripwire or something like this. Open a cupboard, there's a grenade there. I would feel scared, man, every day.
No, if I was still clearing on the front line, like if I was still actively working with military units on the front line or in the gray zone to clear routes for them, definitely I'd be scared. But it's not the mines I'm scared of. It's the drones.
The drones.
It's the drones because there is no safety to do the job. You can't even do it at night. You know, I've done clearance at night for the military because it's the only way to do it. And that's just a case of using a very low red headlight.
Yeah.
And just very, very slowly just working. And it's taking me twice the amount of time to do the work just to clear a route. But with thermal drones and everything, there is nowhere to hide, you know?
Yeah.
So, but actually dealing with the munitions themselves, when you understand how each one works, as long as you follow the rules, you should be fine, you know? Accidents will happen, you know? And with the booby trapping and IEDs, you do have to be a lot more careful.
Yeah.
You know, it is becoming a larger issue here now.
Are there like a lot of accidents when it comes to kind of EOD stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot. Have you experienced any such accidents yourself? I know like it could be lethal each accident you do, but maybe on like a smaller scale or maybe someone in your group.
I've thankfully never had anyone hurt or killed from my team. I've had a close call myself in the
Yeah.
past, just when I've been tired at the end of the day, and
Can you
I've
explain it?
just
Yeah.
not paid, attention to the rules. But the a lot of the units that I've worked with, a lot of the units that we train or we support with equipment and everything else, a lot of their sappers are dying. So Third Separate Assault Brigade would be a perfect example. And it's not so much that their combat engineers, their sappers are being killed by mines. It's the fact that they're still dying from fragmentation. They're still dying from shelling. They're still being shot.
Yeah.
They're still being attacked with drone munitions. But it takes a reasonable amount of time to train a sapper. Even just to train someone in the basic skills, just so they can self-extract out of a minefield if they find themselves in one, takes some time to do safely. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to try and put a figure on how many combat engineers are being killed. I imagine it's a lot.
Yeah. And for your specific, profession, what is something that Ukraine or the government can do better to help people like you?
I just train as many combat engineers as they can. I have this conversation with people quite often because, I have to try and raise donations for us to be able to operate the vehicles. We have 2 ambulances as well, so to be able to do that, it's quite tricky. And if you go onto social media right now, you will see people raising money for cars, or they're raising money for FPV drones, or they're raising money for medical equipment. All of it is equally needed. So combat engineer equipment, EOD equipment, it's needed. Demining equipment, it's needed. FPV drones, it's needed. However, we've also got to look at the situation in the east and the south of the country. We have a huge mine belt, but it's not a standard mine belt where you have continuous frontline mined areas. What you have is, years and years now of mines that were laid by both sides, defensive mines. Then as the frontliners kind of fluctuated, one side has pushed forward. That means the mines are now behind them. They might have set some off, but they're now behind them. They then lay a new defensive mine belt. The other side's being pushed back. They lay a new defensive mine belt. And can you understand how this flows? So whenever this happens, the mine belt gets thicker and thicker and thicker.
Say the war ends like right now, Ukraine gets all its territory back. How many years will it take to demine the whole country?
I'm probably going to have someone knock on my door when I say this, but it's over 100 years.
100 years?
It will be 100 years. We're still clearing Cambodia. We're still clearing Afghanistan.
Wow. Yeah, I heard of like there's still mines in Bosnia, for example.
Wow, the sheer numbers here and the difficulty in clearing them. It is, and I think we have to be honest about it. I think the best thing, if the war ended right now, there's going to be large areas that I think the government should literally just completely block off to civilian access.
Wow.
100%. Take the trench positions in and around Bakhmut or Avdiivka, heavily mined areas. We can't use mechanical machines on a lot of those areas because the ground is so rough. You can't do it. I mean, I had someone contacted me the other day to say, look, we've got problems with mines in our area, and we need to try and remove the Russian bodies because we can't stand the smell. Like, what's the quick fix? There is no quick fix. You can't rush this job, otherwise we're just going to kill people. There's a lot of Russian prisoners. Find out which ones don't want to go back. Train them as humanitarian deminers. Give them a job to do.
Wow.
I'm not saying just let them out the door and force them across the field. That's not what I'm saying. Train them, give them a job to do.
No, it's a great idea. Speaking of like the war ending, how do you think the war is going to end?
I don't know right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just hope that the support for Ukraine continues. I hope the support gets better. But it's, from geopolitical point, it's very, very complex, and it's way above my pay grade to, I think, to comment on it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give you a scenario then. So scenario is whatever Russia has right now, they can, keep it.
Yeah.
But then Ukraine gets to join NATO.
Okay.
And if there's any further aggression from Russia, then Article 5 is triggered, and then Ukraine gets all the help they need.
Sure.
Would you be happy with this kind of end result? Or is this none of your business because you're a foreigner?
Yeah,
or-
I mean, I think that would be a very hard pill for Ukraine to swallow. I really do, and I mean, there's been so much blood spilt at this point for the last 10 years, and I think that would be very, very hard for Ukraine to accept. I'm just here to support Ukraine until they turn around and say, we don't need your help anymore. So.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask, I know you have like a wife and kid. Like, how do they feel? Because your job is so dangerous.
I met my it's my fiance. I met my fiance in Kramatorsk. She was she's a paramedic. She was doing. She reached out to me because she was looking for a contact in the military. I was under military contract at the time. So I started helping support them to get them the information and any equipment they needed to continue doing medical evacuations.
And
so
she's Ukrainian.
No, she's American.
American?
Yeah.
Oh, well.
So she had come into the war very early on and was working with an organization doing the paramedic evacuations of wounded personnel back out to Poland so they could be flown to Germany for treatment. And then when I met her, this was January 2023, down in Kramatorsk. And then we were doing the evacuations from Bakhmut and Soledar. And then, unfortunately, her work partner, Pete Reed, was killed in Bakhmut.
Oh, wow.
Thankfully, she wasn't with them that day. And she'd actually just gone back to the US. So we'd dealt with that. And then she'd escorted Pete's wife and his remains back to the US.
Wow.
And then I got a phone call to say that I was having a baby. So the baby was made in Slavyansk. There we go.
Slavyansk, wow.
Yeah, so we came back. So we were out for quite a bit of last year. We weren't in country for a lot of it because they're having the baby.
Yeah, of course,
I came back in July and August to do some training for a couple of units here. And then we both came back in with the baby in February this year to start pushing our organization properly. We decided in July last year to build our own organization. I was going to step away from the frontline work. So yeah, we came in to try and get all that together, which was a big move for us to bring a 3-month-old into a conflict zone.
Yeah.
There was a lot of time spent on thinking about that, and we weighed everything up, and we were doing okay. And then unfortunately there was a 101 cruise missile shot down quite close to our house.
Oh, wow.
And that was the changing point. So
Do you see a future in Ukraine for you and your family?
potentially, yeah. I would not bring my daughter back in at this point until there's some kind of conclusion to the fighting. But yeah, I see every possibility of, having a home here. So
Well, what makes Ukraine so special for you?
I like the people. I've come to love the people,
Because your fiance is American, so you could easily go to the U.S. if
Sure.
you need. Yeah.
Yeah.
What makes Ukraine so special? You like the people, the culture, maybe?
The people, the culture, just the way of life. I don't want to say that I would be here full time, only because I've always been quite nomadic anyway.
Yeah.
But the ability for us to have a place in the US and a place here and a place on the Isle of Man, and because our organization's here now, I mean, we have an American 501c3. We also have a Ukrainian NGO. We're here for the long run. If the war ends tomorrow, we'll still keep working here until we pass on our positions within the organization. So.
Oh, wow. And how does it work with residency for someone that is in the military? Do you get like some permanent residency? You get like a passport or something like this?
So I've been coming in on normally on the 3-month entry, but because I was signed under contract with Ukrainian military, I didn't need to do anything with the visa at that point because I had the paperwork documents to obviously show to that. Now that I've come back in as a civilian, I've literally just had to jump out to go and do my D-type, and now I'll get my temporary residency and then try to get my residency. So.
Well, nice, man. I guess like last question then, because we're running at our time. So what is something that you wish more people knew about the situation in Ukraine?
The seriousness of the minefield. The minefields are one of the biggest problems for regaining the ground. If we don't clear the mines, we can't drive armored vehicles across that front line. Things like the American MICLIC systems, they're great, but they don't work in Ukraine because of the FPV drones. You know, a MICLIC will clear, depending on which country's MICLIC it is, it's a mine clearance line charge. So it's a big explosive rope fired with a rocket from a vehicle. Even the longest ones, I think, are only 140 meters long. East Ukraine, the fields, some of them are 1,000 meters long.
Wow.
Which means you've got to reload this thing at least 8 times just to get across one field. Once you've shot that the first time, even if you make it a way to go and reload it again, there's an FPV drone waiting to blow you up. So it's gonna have to be manual clearance.
And what can the average person do to help with this cause?
Support the mine clearance as well as everything else that they support.
Is there certain like charities they could donate to?
I mean, of course, I'm going to say mine. I don't know if there's many military units that are actively trying to raise donations. So what we do is we build mine clearance kits, we hand them out. And there's a couple of other organizations. There's another humanitarian organization that we work with, Invictus Global. So we've partnered up on a lot of this stuff to really try and drive as much focus as we can. And we support both sectors. You know, I personally will support both sectors. I'll support the humanitarian side, and I'll support the military mine clearance. Either side is getting mines out of the ground. That's all that matters. But I think even if people don't want to support military operations, you know, there is a number of humanitarian organizations doing mine clearance on the ground here. There's plenty of scope to do it.
I don't know, I wish you luck with that. It's like from what it sounds, there's going to be many, many years of work clearing these mines.
Never going to run out of it.
Yeah, never going to run 100 years, man.
That's a conservative estimate for me.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, let's take this time. Is there anything that you want to discuss that we haven't discussed here that maybe you want to share? Something that you think that it's important for the audience to know about you or about the situation in general? Or we covered everything?
You know, I think people just really need to understand that Ukraine just really needs the support. You know, the Western countries turned around and said that they will support Ukraine to the end. And we've started to see that slide a little bit. I think certainly in the media, whether that's the media pushing their own opinion on it or not, Ukraine doesn't have time to wait for this support. You know, I've just come back from Kharkiv now. The situation there is tense. It is tense. You know, you can feel it. You can just feel it by being around the people there, you know. Every night that we've been there, we're getting hit with CAB 500s to 1500 aircraft munitions.
Wow.
We were out, myself and my team and some guys from Invictus were looking at a site that was hit the day before. And then we had a missile come in maybe 500 or 600 meters away from when we were working there. You know, it is really tense, you know. I'm hoping that this aid has turned up in time to really make a difference. But no matter what, you know, Western media is Western media. Ukraine is interesting when something's going on, and when it's quiet, they move on to something else, you know. some famous person walked in and out of a restaurant. Great, you know.
Yeah.
This is people's lives at stake. You know, it's people's homes, people's families, people's livelihood.
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine is full of great people, and it's just a tragedy what's going on. You know, and Russia's sending just, I don't know, convicts. They're sending, you know, people from the rural areas that don't really care about human lives.
Yeah.
And Ukrainians, like each life in Ukraine is so important.
Yeah.
And so many are being lost.
It's just needless.
Yeah, it
you
is.
know? And I still can't fathom why they do half the things that they do. You know, nearly everything that they hit in Kharkiv or Kharkiv Oblast, it's a field.
Yeah.
It's someone's back garden. You know, it's an apartment block. They're not military targets. You know, I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I was in Odessa. I think I was messaging maybe at this time when when I was contacting you. I was in Odessa when they attacked kind of like this promenade area near like the Black Sea, and they hit like this Kivlov Castle, I think it's called. And I was talking with my American friend there. I said, why would they attack this area? Many civilians died, and what we came up with was the artillery or whatever it was, the rocket. It's not accurate. They missed their spots. Maybe there's a spot here that we don't know of that is like military. Or maybe they're just trying to terrorize civilians.
Yeah.
And we just came down to they're probably just going to terrorize civilians because these rockets are quite accurate, typically, right? I don't know, maybe you know this better than me. Rockets are accurate, right?
They're supposed to be.
They're supposed to be. I'm sure there's like a margin of error, but it just seems like they just want to terrorize civilians, and it's like so messed up, man.
But I mean, I think if they think that they're going to drive enough fear into the population that they're going to stand up and turn around to the Ukrainian government and say, stop it, just give them the land. It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, the Ukrainian people are a proud people, and rightly so. They're not gonna let this slide. They're not gonna bow down.
Yeah.
So
that's such a shame what's going on in this country. But Swampy, I want to thank you so much for coming on the cast. And you can use this time now to plug whatever initiatives you want or just your social media. You can just look in that camera and just,
If you would like to support what we are doing in Ukraine with mine clearance and mine awareness, and also medical support for the police EOD teams, you can find us at our website on prevailtogether.org.
Thanks so much for coming out, Swampy. And if you like this podcast, please like and subscribe. During the premiere of this video, I'll be live chatting with you guys in the comments. I'll try to get Swampy to join as well so we could all chat together while this is going on. Thank you so much for coming out. And I like to do this at the end of every cast. I want to shake hands. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming. Let me get my mic. Thanks so much for coming out, Swampy.
Thank you.
It's really great what you do, man. And I hope there's a speedy victory for Ukraine.
Same. Slava Ukraine.
Harrowing Slava. I like your shirt, by the way. EOD?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wore this shirt for you, man.
I thought you might have.
All right, cheers, man.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out again, Swampy.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.